Hi, I'm Megan from Sew and Tell Australia, and I'm working with Brindille and Twig to bring you their number 147 pattern, the Eden coveralls. This is such a cute pattern and one that I think is really great and on trend at the moment. It's great to work with a lot of linen, some double gauze. It's just super stylish and you see it in a lot of shops. So this coverall goes from a size 0 to 3 months right up to a size 5 to 6. So it's quite a generous size range. And it's got a long sleeve option and a short sleeve option. So we're going to be doing the short sleeve option today. I'm going to make one for my son in a size 3 to 4, I think it is. So I am excited to be coming into spring in Australia. So he's going to get a lot of wear out of this one. And it's just a great one to sort of slouch around with. It's really comfortable and I can't wait for him to wear it. So the things that we're going to need, this is a woven pattern. So I've got a really beautiful linen here from Wattle Hill Fabrics. They have a great range of linens on hand. I've also got some matching thread. So we are going to be using a mix of my normal domestic machine and my serger. So it just depends on which part. But being a woven linen product, it does fray quite easily. So that is something to be aware of. And we definitely don't want to leave those edges too raw, otherwise they're going to fray away. So I've got my linen, I've got matching thread that I'm going to be using in both the serger and the domestic. I've got my scissors, my rotary cutter, because I am team rotary, and I will be cutting these pieces out on my projector. I like to have a pair of snips handy just to snip away any of those wayward threads. I've got pins. I'm a big fan of pins when I'm using wovens. I'm using linen. If I'm using cotton lycra, I tend to use clips, so I probably will use some clips, but predominantly pins for a lot of it. And then we're going to have some buttons because it's got a super cute button placket down the middle. And then we've got some interfacing as well that we're going to use just to reinforce those placket pieces for the buttons. So let's get started on cutting this one out. I'll take you over to the projector and I can show you how to get it all cut out and ready to sew. As you can see here, I have loaded up my pattern pieces. I'm starting with the front, so I need to cut one mirrored pieces of each other. I have pre-washed my linen. It's really important to make sure you pre-wash your wovens because they can shrink up to 10%. So all I'm going to do is start to cut out each pattern piece. And you'll see how easy it is to use a projector. So that is the first side done already. So now all I need to do is cut out my other side. And that is my fronts done, and I'm ready to now move on to my back pieces. So I have a magnetized mat, as you can see, so it makes it a lot easier, but I'll just bring up my back piece. So I can now move my fabric along. I just like to make sure it's all lined up again. It's also important to make sure your grain line is really straight on these. So I tend to make sure that my selvage is straight, and then I know that my pieces are straight as well. Ready to cut. So this does work whether you're using a projector or your paper pattern pieces. Obviously with your paper pattern pieces you will have printed them out, either traced the size you need or cut out the size you need, and then you would lay your pieces on the fabric the same. So it is a little bit easier to play pattern Tetris when you've got pattern pieces, paper pattern pieces I should say. However, it's not impossible to do pattern Tetris with your projector. You just need to do it digitally. So there are a few programs out there that can help. But that is my second piece cut. So now I'm going to cut out my sleeves. So I'll bring my sleeves up and I need to cut 2 of those. So I'm actually going to cut them out of the fabric up here. I'll just fold it over. As I mentioned, I'm going to do the short sleeve version because it is coming into spring in Melbourne. And because I'm doing the size 3 to 4, he is 3. And I've measured him and I should get the summer out of this as well. So I'm excited to see him in his little linen suit. I think it's going to be uber cute. And then the last thing that we need to cut is just the placket. So I'll load those up. You can also do these from a contrasting fabric if you wanted to. You don't have to do it from the fabric that you're using. I mean, it does make it a bit easier if you want, you know, if it's going to show a little bit, because I think it all will show a tiny little bit sort of from the front, but only on the side, like at the edges type thing. So that's that one. Now I'm just going to cut this out. Now we do have to also cut our interfacing out of these. So whether you cut it from your pattern pieces, like your paper pattern or projector pattern pieces, or you just lay your cut pattern pieces on it and cut from there, is up to you. So I will just cut these. So now all I need to do is cut my interfaced pieces out of this and this piece. So I will cut those pieces and then I will take it over to the iron and we'll prepare those pieces. So I've cut my pieces out and I have now lined them up. So I've got iron on interfacing and I've just placed it on the wrong side of my placket pieces. And now I'm just going to iron them on. It is a good idea if you've got a Teflon sheet that can help save your ironing board, because otherwise it's going to stick a little bit like this. But I'm okay with it for now. It doesn't bother me so much. So I'm just going to give this a really good press and make sure it's well adhered to the wrong side of my fabric. And this is what's going to help give the stability when you're doing your buttonholes or your snaps. So we're going to do buttonholes on this because I'm going to show you how to use your automatic buttonhole foot. But if you want to use snaps, it's a good idea to interface because you really want to get that good solid structure in these pieces so that they don't rip out. So I'm going to finish preparing these pattern pieces by putting the interfacing on, and then we can go to our sewing machine and start sewing. Got my interfaced pieces now. I just trimmed it up a little bit to fit. And now what I'm going to do is I need to line up these pieces here because we're going to sew across the top of each of these placket pieces. So I'm going to get this here and just line this one up like this. And now what I can do, it should look like this, so they should overlap a little bit because that's where the buttons are going to go. But we're going to sew along the tops here to attach them together. I've got a universal 90-14 in here. I have matching thread. I'm going to put my stitch length on 2.6 and then I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to do a little back stitch at the start and end just to secure those seams. And I'm just going to sew straight across the top here. Again, securing those back and end bits. And now I'm going to do the same to the other side. just making sure that I don't sew over my pins. Some people do, and if that's you, then that's fine, but I am not a fan of sewing over pins. So now we have our placket pieces together. I'm going to take this over to my iron and open it out. Now that I've prepared my placket pieces, so they are all interfaced, I've connected them and flattened or pressed the seams, I'm going to swap my normal machine, my domestic machine, over for my overlocker, and I'll be using my overlocker for a little bit before I switch back to the normal machine or domestic machine when I'm doing the buttons. So let's swap that out and we can get started with putting the rest together. Okay, I've swapped over to my serger, I've loaded up the right threads, and now I'm going to get my front and back pieces. So I'm going to lay my fabric with the right side up, and it's got a little bit of a mark here, but that's just where I pressed it, the steam came out. And then I'm going to lay my front pieces right side down. I'm aligning the shoulder seams for this one, and then I'm going to clip this time because I think it's probably just as quick and easy. And then what I'm going to do is on my serger, I'm going to serge across the top of both these shoulder seams. So as you can see, I've got my serger ready, and I'm just going to go straight across the top. And the reason it's ideal to serge these pieces is because the way the woven is, it can, as I've mentioned, frayed incredibly easy. So if you have a look here, I'm just, I can fray these edges so easily and pick these threads out. So it's really important to finish your edges, and a serger is a great way to do this. So I've got my two pieces here. They are now attached, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open it out. And I know I've said a serger is a great way to do this. You can still use a faux overlock stitch on your machine or a zigzag stitch. It's just really important to make sure that you do finish your edges, because otherwise you're just going to end up with a garment that falls apart. So now I'm going to get my other pieces, my placket pieces, and we're going to line them up. So I'm going to line up my shoulder seams, and in an ideal world, it should all line up pretty much perfectly. Sometimes things can happen if you were stretching your fabric when you were putting your placket on. It may have stretched a little bit, so you might need to sort of jiggle it a little bit. Your fabric might have stretched while you were handling it. So if it doesn't fit perfectly, don't stress too much. You just need to be careful when you're sewing it on. So I'm going to bring this around here and pop a clip. So my back edge is probably a little bit funny, but I'm going to get away with it. And I am actually going to pop one of my labels under here as well, but I'm going to make sure that I've got everything else worked out and happy first. So I'll put my placket piece down here. So I've attached my placket piece to my main piece. I'm going to get a label. So I've got my little labels here. I will put my size on it. I'm going to put my label just in between here at the back. And now I'm going to take this to my serger, or bring it just to my serger, and we're going to serge all the way along and around, finishing off those raw edges. So I'm starting from one edge, going to pop that under there, and And then I'm just going to sew, making sure, or serge, making sure I'm catching both edges as I go along. I'm just trimming off a tiny bit as I go, just to make sure I've got that nice clean edge as I go along. As you get to the curves, it's a good idea to go slow. Curves can be a little bit tricky, but if you go slow and just gently move your fabric around, just maneuver it carefully, you can definitely get a nice clean finish. There's definitely no prizes for how fast you go. And you're going to get, just put that over there, a much nicer finish, taking your time than rushing through. So coming to this second curve, and then as we come down the straight, we can go a little bit quicker and finish it off. We've attached our placket. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to serge around the raw edges as well, because as I've mentioned, we really don't want to have any of those raw edges. It is a little bit better when you've interfaced it, because it does have that extra stability, but just to make it look nice and neat, we're going to serge around the edges of the placket, the raw edges, and then we're going to take it to the iron and give it a really, really good press. So when I'm serging my raw edges, I'm just making sure that my main fabric is out of the way. And then I'm just going to trim a little bit as I go and just go all the way around my piece again, making sure when I get to these curves that one, I've got this fabric out of the way, and take that care to really just go gently around the curves, maneuver the fabric however you need. My label's out of the way, and then just go really gently around the sleeve, around the curves. And then nearly around. Now I'm down to the home stretch again. Quickly neaten that up. So now I'm going to take this to my iron and press it nice. While I'm waiting for my iron to heat up, I'm just going to turn my placket the right way. And what I like to do is a little bit of a finger roll press. So I'm just rolling it over. So make sure you've got nice clean hands. And I'm just rolling it in my fingers to get that seam nice and neat. And I just want to push out those curves. And I'm just giving it a gentle press with my fingers. Just helps kind of set that seam a little bit, and that press, getting it ready to press with our iron. So I'm going to push that to the side. And then again, roll the seam. It just really helps bring it forward. And now with my iron, I can give it a really, really good press. Don't be afraid to use steam if you need. My one spits a bit of water when it steams, but and bring this next bit around. Oh, I need to bring my label to the back. So I'm giving it a really good press. Bring it back round to this bit. And it's really just about manoeuvring the fabric to get the best angle to press, really. Then my last bit down here. Oh, see, big water steam, but that's okay. It will dry. So now it's all pressed. Looking pretty. We can move on to the next step. So we've pressed our placket. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to top stitch along it, which just means we're going to take our domestic machine and we're going to sew about 1/8 of an inch or 2 to 3 mil in from the edge of the seam, just to flatten it and kind of give it a nice look. And then we're also going to sew another, I think it's 1 inch from that seam, to be able to create that nice area that we're going to put our buttonholes in and our button. So I'm going to just take you over to my normal domestic machine and we're going to top stitch our area across the top, and then we can get on with the next little bit. I've got my stitch length set to 2.6, and I just like to choose something on my machine or on my foot to follow as I'm sewing, just to give me something to follow and get a nice sort of even edge stitch. So I'm actually following this little line here. I'm lining that up with the edge of my fabric and just going very slowly. You want to put as little pressure as possible on the fabric because you don't want it to stretch. So I'm not really even touching this. I'm just letting the machine do its work and just guiding it to make sure that it's, you know, generally sticking to that little visual guide I've got to top stitch. And as you'll see, I'm getting a pretty neat top stitch. But really, taking your time is the name of the game with this pattern. So very slowly, go around, and I really want to make sure that this is nice and pushed out, so I'll just give it that little kind of finger press again just to make sure it's really where I want it to be. So I've come out a tiny bit when I'm coming around here, but it'll be okay. And then again, you can move the fabric if you need to. I'm going to make sure my little label is down and that everything is nice and flat. So come around my seams and come around again. And it really is just about taking your time to get the nicest finish that you can. That's something I really like about wovens. I think they really do have like a professional, nice finish about them when they're done well. Like it's really satisfying to do. Knits are, you know, quite quick and easy, and you can be a little bit not as precise, but when you're really precise with your wovens, they just look so pretty. So we'll just keep going down, nearly finished. And that one's done. So we've got our edge stitch or our top stitching done. It's helping keep my little label down. I could have also attached it to the facing here, the placket, but I quite like it there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to sew our next set of top stitching, which we want to have about an inch out from the last one. So it can help to just pin down your placket, because it does help give you that idea about where your placket is sitting. You can also go from the back if you want to, so you know you're catching the placket. But I'm just going to go from the front and just gently pin it down. As you can see, I've still got the area where my steam iron spurted on it, some water, but that will dry. But what I'll probably end up doing is, again, just measuring, using something on my machine to measure from the edge so that I know that I'm going to get a nice, even top stitch. I will need to be careful when I get to my label. I'm just going to push it out of the way a little bit and then continue round. So I put my last pin in. Now it is all pinned around. I can take this back to my domestic and do my next lot of sewing. So I've got a nice band here to be able to work with for my buttonholes and my buttons. So this time I've worked out an inch is roughly the edge of my bobbin case release button. So when I'm sewing, my goal is going to be lining up the edge of my fabric with that. And the reason I'm not back stitching is pretty much because all these seams are going to be caught in another seam, because I will be going along and closing up the bottom edge, so I'm not as concerned about back stitching. But now I'm just going to very gently make sure I'm lining it up here, pulling my pins out as I go. And I'm just going to sew all the way around. Again, I'm trying not to put any pressure on the fabric because I don't want it to stretch. So it's just about sort of gently guiding it. Also making sure it's not twisting or anything. And just as gently as I can, top stitch it around. So this is probably the trickiest bit and where you should definitely go the slowest. And I can see I'm probably going to have a little bit of a bubble there, so we may need to get creative with some when I do my pressing later. I've probably come in a little bit too far as well. So I'm going to pull my label out. So I don't sew that one down. And I'm just trying to make sure I don't really have any pressure on it, as in the pressure of the fabric pulling it down. And gently bringing it around again. You can always, if you need to, I'm actually going to give my foot a little lift because I think I needed it just to get the maneuvering that I needed. And then hopefully on the straight it should be a little bit better. And then we just finish off at the end. So we've finished our little placket stitching. It's looking good. And we did catch it all on the inside, which is nice. So it's all sitting nice and flat. I did have a little bit of bagging going on in here, but it's not too bad. I'm not too worried about it. So now we can move on with the next step. The next step is using the last pieces that we cut out, which is our sleeves. So it's starting to come together slowly but surely. So let's put the sleeves on and then we can start to sew up the sides and make it finished. So let's get started with that. To put our sleeves on, what we're going to do is lay our garment right side up. We're going to get our sleeves and find the middle. And then we're going to lay it right sides together. I'm pretty sure this is the right side, yep. And then I'm going to get a clip and just clip at the shoulder seam. And I'm going to bring this around to the start of our arm side or our underarm and clip again. And then I like to bring it round to the other side, the other arm side. Line it up. Pop a clip in. And then what you should need to do is just gently sort of ease it into your armhole. So I'm going to put another clip here. And then the same for this side. So you might need to just sort of jiggle it a tiny bit. But then what we're going to do is attach this with our serger. So I'll take you to the serger camera and then we can attach that sleeve and we'll repeat for the other side. So I've got my sleeve right sides together and I'm just going to serge this one on, making sure I don't catch any of my fabric underneath because I'll be very sad, and just gently easing it in as I go around. So now we have our first sleeve attached. I'm going to repeat to the other side. These are our sleeves attached. It's looking very nice. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn the garment inside out. And we're going to line up our side seams. So I like to line up my underarm seam. That's one seam that I do like to get nice. And I nest the seams, so I'm going to put my seams one on each side. Put a clip in, line up these raw edges, clip again. And then I'm just going to continue and clip all the way down the edge. And I'm going to do the same to the other side. So again, just folding it with right sides together, lining up my underarm seam and nesting those seams, so having it one to each side. That's just to reduce bulk as well. And then making sure I've got my arms lined up. And then I can just align these seams and clip all the way down. I know I said at the start I'd probably use my pins a lot, but I'm using a lot more clips, I think. So now I can serge down this side and down this side, and then we can do our crotch area. So I'm starting from the bottom, And I'm just going to serge all the way up, cutting a little bit off as I go, just so I get that nice clean edge. And then as I get to my underarm, I just like to make sure that those seams are still nested. So I've got one seam going down and one seam coming up. And then I just gently maneuver my fabric around. We do have this little kick out. This is for when we're hemming. So again, I'm just going to flick this fabric around, and it still keeps that little kick out area there. So I'm going to repeat to the other side, and then we can move on. We've done our side seams. It's all coming together very, very nicely. Now you just need to decide which placket you want to overlay at the front. So I think as a general rule, it's like to the left for boys and to the right for girls. But you just decide which way you want it. And I usually like to pick whichever side I did nicer on goes on top. So I think I'll probably end up with my left side on top. And I'm just going to align the bottom here. And I'm going to put a pin in it. Grab my pins. Just so I don't forget which one was on top. And then I just want to make sure that it's all lining up. It's looking good. So I'll put a couple of pins in just to make sure. Just while we're sewing it. But I am pretty happy with how that's all looking. So I'm going to turn it right sides together again. And now what I can do is line up my crotch. And again, I can get some clips. And I'll be able to line this up. Like this. And then I'm going to serge it on my serger. And our crotch will be done. So just check from the front, and I'm going to take that pin out actually, because I'll be super sad if for some reason I caught it in my serger. So I'm just going to remove this pin now that I know that's where it is. And I guess I just want to also make sure that as I'm serging, and I might need to come up a little bit, that I'm catching this placket and really making sure that that's not getting missed, because I really want to make sure that I catch that in my crotch seam. So I'll take that to my serger and we'll serge this one up. So I've got this one here, and I'm just going to start serging. And just make sure as I'm doing it, I'm catching the bottom of my placket. It's moved a little bit, so I'll just lift that up and bring it around. I can see here that I caught my placket, both bits, and it's all enclosed in there, so that's good. So now that we've got this all done, we can turn it right sides out again. It's definitely coming together as a cute little coverall set. I really love the harem style of this because it just gives that kind of extra little slouchy look, which is nice for summer and spring as well. So it's coming together nicely. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hem our bottoms, our leg cuffs and our sleeve cuffs. So I'm going to, on my overlocker, I'm going to serge the edges just to give them a nice clean edge. I'm then going to press it up and we'll edge stitch around it. So I will serge the edges, press it up, and then we'll edge stitch. I have overlocked all my edges and pressed them up. So now all I'm going to do is just hem my sleeves and my legs. So I will back stitch on this one because I want to make sure that much stays, but otherwise it's just going around and hemming all our sleeves and leg holes. So again, at the end, I'm just going to do a little back stitch. That's our first sleeve done. So I'm going to repeat to the other sleeve and our leg hems, and then we can move on. We are so close to finishing now. So we've done our hems on our sleeves and our legs. I've trimmed off all the little bits and pieces. So the last thing we need to do now is our buttonholes and our buttons. So I will take you to the overhead camera where we can have a look at how we're going to place those. And then we can get to enjoying our new Eden coveralls. So let's have a look at how to do buttons. So here we have our buttons. I'm going to use these sort of teak coloured ones, I guess, or a brown colour anyway. And I'm just gently placing them on my fabric to sort of see where I want them to sit. I've then got a little gauge here, and I'm just going to gently make sure that they're roughly about the same width between. So it's about 3.5 inches from the centre to centre. So I'll just check 3.5, 3.5, this one can come down a little bit. And then this one's about 3.5 as well. So what I'm now going to do is get a little marker and mark where that is. So I'll get my marker. So I've got my marker here. Oops, I spilt some on the fabric. And I'm just going to mark where I want my buttons to go. Like this. So now I know where I'm going to be lining them up, and I'm going to take these over to my domestic machine, and we're going to do our buttonholes all the way down. If your machine has an automatic buttonhole foot, you should have something that looks something like this, and then it has this little area at the back where you pop your button in. Let's go up a bit more. And then that is going to tell it how wide to make it. You then need to pull down, there'll be a little switch or a little lever here. You're going to pop off your normal foot. So you're going to drop your foot onto the bar. Sometimes it can take, there it is. Make sure our button's all there. So you'll see here that the little lever is at the start of the buttonhole, and then as it goes along, it pushes, and then it's going to hit the back of that, and it knows to come forward again. So that one's all set up. You should then have on your machine somewhere your button stitches. So I know I need to do mode 2 for this, so I'll set all that up, and then I should be good to go. So I've got my garment here, and it's important to note that it does do these buttonholes towards the back. So I want to start at the front, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up my little viewing window with the start of the mark I made, and I can make sure that my buttonhole is in between these two lines so that it's going to be nice and in the middle. And then all I'm going to do is, I don't want to touch this, I just again want to gently make sure it's not going to go haywire. And then I'm going to let my machine just do its thing. And what it does is it just goes along. And it will go along until it hits that back bar. And then as it hits that back bar, it knows to come forward again. And so the other side. So this is the automatic buttonhole doing its work. I'm not having to do anything other than guide the fabric to make sure it doesn't go off on a tangent. And then it's hitting that back bar again, and it knows to finish. Now that is automatically slowed down. My foot is still on the presser foot, but it just knows that it has finished. So now I can lift it up and it resets, so I can pull it out. And there's my first buttonhole. So I'm going to do that for all my buttonholes. And again, I'm just going to line up the front in my little window, make sure my foot's in the middle of the area, and then it's just going to start again. So again, it just goes all the way down until it hits that back presser bar, and it knows to come back. So there it is, comes back. And now it will start to do the second side. Like this. And it's getting close to the edge. Now it knows to finish it. And again, I haven't taken my foot off the presser foot. It just knows to finish. And when I lift it up, it resets. So I'm going to finish doing that to my other buttonholes. They're looking good. And then we can attach the buttons. So to finish the buttonholes, all we need to do is open them up. Now, I highly encourage, if you are going to be using an unpicker or a seam ripper, that what you do is you put a pin at the end and a pin at the start. Because what you're going to do is you're going to get your seam ripper and you're going to go in that little space and you're going to rip up to the other end. It is very easy to slip and continue going through, and you will be so upset if you go straight through your newly done buttonhole. So now we're just going to get a button, make sure it goes through. Yep, perfect. So I'm going to make sure, or I'm going to open up the rest of these. And then the last thing we need to do is attach our buttons. So I will show you how to do that on a machine if you do have a button attacher on your machine. But I'll continue doing my buttonholes and then I'll take you back to do our buttons. The last thing I will mention just before we do our buttons is I'm going to get my fabric marker again. I've lined all my buttonholes up and I'm just going to make sure that I'm lining it up on this side. So this will come out the Tailor's chalk, but I'm just going to push it through and give it a little mark so that I know where to put my buttons. So that is all that. You can use a wash away, a friction pen if you want, but I've just used one of those so I can see where my buttons need to go, and this will just wash out in the wash. So now let's attach our buttons. To sew your buttons on with your machine, you should have a foot that looks something like this. So I'm going to take off my buttonhole foot. A little bit maneuvery to get it off sometimes. There we go. I'm going to take out my button because I need that. Pop it in there, and then I can put my button foot on. There we go. I'm going to put my little bit up there. Now I'm going to change my mode. I'm going to change it to be a buttonhole. Just 27. And now it's just a case of having your button. You need to sort of adjust it to fit. So what I'm going to do is I'll get my garment and I'm going to put my button where my little mark tells me it needs to be and place it under my foot like this. Now I'm going to put my presser foot down, and what I need to do is just check that it's in the right spot. So I probably need to move it a little bit. Oh, that's too much. Like this. So that is now going to clear those holes. So now I do it and it's done. So I'm going to move it forward so I can do the other 2 holes. Again, just make sure that one needs to go back a tiny bit. Yep, so I can just do that. That's my first button attached. Now I can just trim those threads and it's done. So I'm going to attach my other buttons and then we can make sure it all fits. I've trimmed all my button little threads. I've put it all together and look how cute our Eden coveralls have turned out. So I'm super happy with this one. It's a beautiful soft linen. I've got all my little threads trimmed. We used our serger to get some nice neat seams on the inside, and it just came out so well. So I used this linen again from Wattle Hill Fabric, so I'm very happy with how it all feels. Make sure you're pre-washing your wovens, but otherwise I hope that helped you put together your own Eden coveralls for your own little one. And if you've got any questions, you can always pop them in the comment box below. The pattern is linked below as well, so you can grab your copy and get started on your own pair of Eden coveralls. You can find me on all the socials. I'll pop those links in the description below, and make sure you're in the Brindille and Twig pattern group as well, so that you can get all the help that you need there too. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the videos, and I hope to see you in the next one. But for now, tag me in any of your makes of your Eden coveralls. I can't wait to see them, and thank you for watching this one with me.